Now, a while ago, I was posed with an interesting question on one of the Dave Knows Wrestling live streams. Which reminds me, make sure that your notifications are working, that way you know the moment I go live so you can join in on all the fun. But back to the question at hand, and since I know many of you are up to date on all my videos, then you no doubt realize that I am a huge fan of the J Crown. And I definitely wish it was around here today. So the question is, if it were to be brought back, what 8 titles would I include in it? Well, that's a really good question. And it's also the topic of this episode, because today... Thank you so much for the support over on Patreon, Jesus Pharaoh. Before we begin, let me just ask you to give this video a big thumbs up as well as subscribing right here to the channel. Thanks a lot, I really do appreciate it. Previously, I already covered the history of the J Crown Championship, and I also recently brought it up in my episode about double champions. And truth be told, I actually had plans to do this episode long before I was ever asked the question, but I figured this was a sign to go ahead and move forward with this particular episode. Now, before we begin, let's quickly go over what the J Crown actually was for the uninitiated. Alright, so the J Crown Championship was actually 8 distinct championships unto themselves, all representing lower weight classes and all unified under one single banner. But sadly, in a short amount of time, a lot has actually changed since I made that last video, with the statuses of some of these titles no longer being active, which means that if we were to reboot this championship, we would have to select some new titles to take part, which is exactly what we're going to be doing for this video. And with that being said, let's see what belt is up first. The IWGP Junior Heavyweight Championship, New Japan. As the only definitively still active championship of the original J Crown, this belt just had to make the list, as the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Championship is the only belt that we definitely know for sure is still going strong. And strong it is, as the Junior Heavyweight Championship is definitely one of the most exciting divisions around. And with the awesomeness of the Best of the Super Juniors tournament, I of course had no choice but to represent this championship here, and even if it wasn't part of the original J Crown, I would definitely be doing it anyway. So, starting us off, the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Championship, CMLL. So earlier, I mentioned that there was a bit of a status change for some of the belts of the old guard since I previously covered them. Well, one of the biggest changes from then to now definitely has to be the resurgence of the NWA. In 2019, the NWA simply became a promotion instead of a governing body, and thus many changes were made to the organization, with the NWA, not of this recording, having any championship designated for lighter weight classes, as the company abandoned some of their former titles for such divisions, namely 2 former titles under the J Crown, the NWA World Junior Heavyweight Championship and the NWA World Welterweight Championship, and the welterweight title in specific not having any official record since 2016. So it may still be out there somewhere just without any proper jurisdiction, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a suitable replacement. Introducing the NWA World Historic Welterweight Championship. Yes, that does sound very similar to the previous title, but I assure you it is definitely a different and distinct belt unto itself. Now I know I just said that the NWA wasn't recognizing lighter weight titles at this time, so how could this possibly be? Well, despite the moniker, the belt does have an official designation, it's just not the National Wrestling Alliance. For this belt is actually a CMLL championship. Originally, the Consejo Mundial de Lucha Libre was known as the EMLL, Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre, and during their beginnings they had their own welterweight title. But when they joined the alliance in the 1950s, the NWA prefix replaced the EMLL one, thus making the title the NWA Welterweight Championship. Now hang on, cause it gets more complicated than that. After eventually leaving the NWA, the EMLL lost control of their original title to the Alliance. However, also during this time, the Comisión de Box y Lucha Libre Mexico, a governing body that sanctions titles but was not a promotion itself, had commissioned a brand new championship, the Mexican National Welterweight title, which the EMLL promoted and controlled as their very own. However, this was not a world welterweight title, it was a national championship. So when the Empresa de Mexicana became the Consejo de Mundial, the promotion decided to create yet another welterweight championship, and this time it would be called the CMLL World Welterweight title. But don't think that the NWA Welterweight Championship was completely out of the picture, because it wasn't, as the two organizations still maintained a solid working relationship, allowing for the NWA version to still be contested within the CMLL, as well as WCW and Japan, and of course as part of the J Crown Championship. And just so you know, it was actually La Sombra who was the one to bring the title back to Mexico. Now, as I'm sure all of you could guess, with all of this traveling, it was definitely very hard for the NWA to keep track of where this belt actually was. Especially since after the decline of the Alliance, they really had bigger fish to fry. But don't get me wrong, during this time, the NWA still made repeated attempts to try and get the belt back, but to no avail. Not even when Blue Demon Jr. asked, as he was tasked with trying to start the NWA Mexico as a brand new promotion. The closest thing that they got to a response was the NWA welterweight champion at the time, simply stating that the belt rightfully belonged to the CMLL, since it was created by them and they were the ones who were actively promoting it for years. But alas, the CMLL would eventually relent and give the title to the NWA Mexico in 2010. But instead of taking this as a loss, the CMLL simply responded by creating, yet again, another welterweight championship, which is the one that we're using here today. And so, with a weight jurisdiction of 70 kilos to 78 kilos, or 150 pounds to 172 pounds, I present to you the NWA World Historic Welterweight Championship. And okay, with that out the way, I promise it's just gonna get easier from here. Oh, and don't think I forgot about that NWA Junior Heavyweight title. It was vacated in 2017. See, I told you things were gonna get easier. Now, as for what title I'm gonna use to replace that belt, well, we're gonna get to that just a little bit later on. For now, let's move on to the next title, Rev Pro. The British Commonwealth Junior Heavyweight Championship has been inactive ever since 2003, and in order to replace it, I'm gonna go with yet another British promotion, Revolution Pro Wrestling. Created in 2008, the Rev Pro Cruiserweight title started off under a different banner. Mark Haskins, the Real Quality Wrestling Cruiserweight Champion of the time, is recognized as the first Cruiserweight Champion by RPW. After this, the title then switched to being under the International Pro Wrestling UK division. That is, until Booker Andy Quildan split off to form Revolution Pro Wrestling, where he took some of the IPW UK's titles along with him, including the British Cruiserweight title, AAA. Let's go back to Mexico for this one, but this time around, let's go to AAA, as that is the promotion that will be taking the place of the UWA for this video. The Universal Wrestling Association was a Mexican promotion until 1995, which is actually before the J-Crown even formed, so how is this possible? Well, the Gran Hamada, who was the champ at the time of the company's closing, just took the belt with him to Japan. And then, after the J-Crown disbanded, it had nowhere to go. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't still contested, because it definitely was, as yet again, the Gran Hamada won a tournament for the vacated title, which is only fitting since he was the one to bring the belt to Japan in the first place. Now, it would eventually go back to Mexico in 1999, where it would continue its lineage. However, the belt really hasn't seen all that much activity since 2013, so while it is technically active and could spring up again at any point, I'm just gonna go ahead and say that this belt is not available for the moment. Which is why I'm replacing it with the AAA World Cruiserweight Championship. It was first won in 2009 by Alex Kozlov, but don't hold that against the belt, as it's also been won by a lot of really great talent, such as John Morrison, Sammy Guevara, and currently, as of this recording, the Laredo Kid. Not to mention also El Hijo del Fantasma, but more on him later on. 01 and WWA. Okay, so the WWA World Junior Light Heavyweight title has a very complicated history that I do not feel like getting into here today, especially since I already went over it in the previous video. Anyway, this original J-Crown Championship, which is actually 2 championships, again, I'm not going over that, hasn't officially been deactivated as of yet by either of its 2 promotions. But they also haven't done anything in years that would really constitute as being active either. So I'm just gonna count the both of them as being out of commission. But to replace this title, which was just one title when it was in the J-Crown, I'm not going to be choosing sides here. Instead, I'm just going to choose one title from each promotion. First, from the WWA, created in 1987, El Bandito is the current WWA World Welterweight Champion. Oh great, another welterweight. Now, he won this belt back in 2017, but at least for the most part, it still appears to be somewhat active, so I'm just gonna go ahead and go with it. Now, as for that other promotion, I'm going with the 01 World Junior Heavyweight title, with a weight limit of 220 pounds or 100 kilos. The first champion was crowned back in 2011 and is now currently around the waist of Hub. Yeah, that's right, Hub. What do you want from me? I didn't name him. The NXT Cruiserweight title. Next up, it's NXT. NXT. For those of you who remember, a forgotten WWF title was a part of the original J-Crown, so it would only be fitting to replace it with yet another one of Vince McMahon's belts, but this time it's going to be the NXT Cruiserweight Championship, which in the interim is being held by El Hijo del Fantasma. And with the WWF Light Heavyweight title getting mixed up with the J-Crown just because WWF forgot about it in the first place, I'm just gonna go out on a limb and assume that if anything from 205 Live disappeared, Vince McMahon probably won't notice. And finally, my replacement for the NWA World Junior Heavyweight Championship, we have the XDivision. The XDivision was one of TNA's most exciting features and one of the biggest draws to the promotion, and it was just recently won by Chris Bay. Now yes, I know with former champions like Samoa Joe and Willie Mack, how does this really qualify as a lighter weight title? Well, as some of you might have forgotten, back during its early years, the XDivision did have a weight limit of 230 pounds. And while this concept has since been abandoned, I think it might not be the worst idea to go ahead and bring it back. Well, there you go, my 8 titles for the reboot of the J-Crown. What are some belts that you would like to see? Let me know down in the comments, and also a big shout out to all my awesome supporters over on Patreon who are definitely helping me out during these trying times. And I also want to remind you, if you haven't voted on those exclusive polls yet, what are you waiting for? Help shape the future of this channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.